clarification of the scope of deemed export control. This e-learning program is designed to help faculty, staff, and students of universities and research institutes to understand the basics of security export control. Security export control is essential when conducting educational and research activities involving the transfer of technologies and export of goods. License from the Minister of Economy, Trade, and Industry may be required as a result of review by each university or research institute. As for specific procedures, please follow the rules of each university or research institute and implement them appropriately. In this unit, I will explain the clarification of the scope of deemed export control. This video material was prepared based on information available as of March 2023. For the latest information, please visit the METI's website on the Security Export Control. Examples of opportunities for the transfer of technologies in academic and research institutions. In Japan, the Foreign Exchange and Foreign Trade Act, so-called FEFTA, regulates the transfer of technologies and the export of goods. Universities and research institutes in particular have many opportunities for the transfer of technologies, and in order to comply with the control under the FEFTA, it is important to know the opportunities for the transfer of technologies, such as the provision of information by telephone or email, classes, conferences, meetings, and research instructions that are common in universities and research institutes, and to understand that they may be subject to the control. It should be noted that online lectures, conferences, and meetings can also be opportunities for the transfer of technologies. Transfer of technology subject to the control under the FEFTA. What is deemed export control? Under the FEFTA, the acts of transferring technology subject to the control are broadly classified into two categories. As a regulation from the geographical perspective, transactions aimed at transferring controlled technology outside Japan fall under the transfer of technology regulated by the FEFTA, and therefore transferring of controlled technology to a person in a foreign country across the border is subject to the control, regardless of whether the person is a resident or a non-resident. As a regulation from the human perspective, transactions aimed at transferring controlled technology from a resident to a non-resident fall under the transfer of technology regulated by the FEFTA. Under the regulation from a human perspective, technology transfer from a resident to a non-resident in Japan is also controlled as deemed export, because it is highly probable that the non-resident will eventually leave Japan and transfer the technology overseas, and this is called deemed export control. However, under the FEFTA, foreign people who have lived in Japan for more than 6 months or those who have employed in Japan are classified as residents, so the transfer of technology to such people was previously exempt from deemed export control. Review on the scope of deemed export control. The revision of the service notification in May 1, 2022 clarified the transfer of technology subject to deemed export control. Given the growing international concerns about the leakage of sensitive technology through individuals, it was suggested that the scope of deemed export control is not sufficient to prevent the risk of residents under the influence of foreign countries being involved in the sensitive technology leakage, based on which the revision was made. As a result, it was clarified that not only the transfer of technology to non-residents, but also the transfer of technology to residents under the strong influence of non-residents, foreign governments, or entities by employment contracts or economic interests, in other words, the residents fall under the specific category, is also subject to deemed export control. The specific categories stand for 3 categories: person under the control of a foreign government or entity by employment contract, person under the control of a foreign government by economic interests, and person acting in Japan under the instructions of a foreign government. Persons who fall under a specific category are limited to residents regarded as natural persons regardless of their nationalities. This means that even Japanese can fall under a specific category. Examples of specific category persons in academic and research institutions. Transfer of technology to a resident who falls under the specific categories 1, 2, or 3, so-called specific category person, is subject to deemed export control. This slide shows examples of specific category persons in universities and research institutes. Specific Category 1 is a person under the control of a foreign government or entity by employment contract. For example, a person who has an employment contract with a foreign university and works concurrently for the university, or a student working for a foreign company. Specific Category 2 is a person under the control of a foreign government by economic interests. For example, a person receiving financial support to study abroad or research funding from a foreign government. Specific Category 3 is a person acting in Japan under the instructions of a foreign government. For example, a person acting so-called espionage in Japan according to instructions and requests from a foreign government. When confirming whether an individual falls under the specific categories, be sure to confirm the precise definition of each category from the provisions of the service notification. Please note that the specific categories are only a categorized list of cases in which the technology transfer must be individually reviewed during the license application process to determine whether there are national security concerns. Therefore, those who fall under the specific categories are not always regarded as individuals of national security concerns. Outline of Guideline for Judging Specific Categories, Part 1. If a university or research institute transfers technology subject to control to a resident who falls under a specific category, it is necessary to apply for license from the Minister of Economy, Trade, and Industry. For this reason, it is necessary to determine the applicability of the recipient of the technology, such as students, faculty, or staff, to a specific category before a university or research institute provides technology to the extent that it can be confirmed within the scope of the duty of care reasonably required. Appended Sheets 1 to 3 of the Service Notification Guideline for Judging Specific Categories presents how to determine whether a recipient of the technology falls under a specific category, and confirmation in accordance with this guideline will be considered as fulfillment of the duty of care reasonably required. Please note that the method of confirmation varies depending on whether the recipient is in an employment relationship with the technology transferor, that is, a university or research institute. Confirmation of the specific category applicability of persons who is not in an employment relationship with university or research institute, such as students, is based on the information contained in documents such as written contracts, which are generally acquired for any of the specific categories 1 through 3. In addition to the confirmation, if a notice is received from METI that the person may fall under any of the specific categories 1 through 3 in principle, the subject person shall be treated as a person falling under the specific category. Outline of Guideline for Judging Specific Categories, Part 2. Confirmation of the applicability of persons who was in an employment relationship with university or research institute, such as faculty members, to the specific category 1 or 2 is first made by self-reported pledge at the time of new recruitment. Furthermore, after employment, confirmation will be conducted by imposing an obligation to self-report any new cases in which the individuals fall under the specific category 1 or 2. Confirmation of applicability of persons already employed as of May 1, 2022 to the specific categories will be conducted by imposing an obligation to self-report any new cases in which they fall under the specific category 1 or 2. If the employment regulations prohibit or require reporting of side jobs or conflicts of interest, the reporting obligation is regarded as being imposed. It is not necessary to obtain an additional self-reported pledge from those already employed as of May 1, 2022, but those who are already working concurrently for a foreign entity or government or receiving funds from a foreign government as of May 1st fall under the specific category, so appropriate treatment is needed. On the other hand, confirmation of the applicability to the specific category, 3, is based on the information contained in documents, such as written contracts, which are generally acquired. In addition to the confirmation, if a notice is received from METI, the person may fall under any of the specific categories 1 through 3. In principle, the subject person shall be treated as a person falling under the specific category. The outline of the guideline is as above, but when confirming whether an individual falls under the specific categories, be sure to confirm the precise definition of the service notification. This concludes my explanation of the clarification of the scope of deemed export control.